Of course, character is important here. We have different kinds of characters. We have our protagonist versus our antagonist. There are different types of narrators. Of course, we have just the traditional narrator, but we also have the naive narrator, which some people say that's what Scout is. Um, in To Kill a Mockingbird. Also, we have the unreliable narrator. So, can we trust our narrator to tell us the truth? Is always a question. We have static versus dynamic characters. That is, static characters don't typically change, whereas dynamic characters do. We have flat versus round characters. So flat characters typically have one trait. They're very simple. They're usually supporting characters. Round characters have lots of characteristics. So we really see a big, the overall picture, which is why they're round characters. The anti-hero, we will actually talk about some. This is the disappointing hero. So the hero who is not really a hero. We have stock characters. These are those stereotypical characters like the sidekick. Um, Foils are characters who are pairs. So we see two characters, and they tend to be they share something in common, but also have something exactly opposite about them. We will talk about that more when we get to Hamlet. Okay, and then character motivation. Why is it a character does what he or she does? So, some things to keep in mind. Setting. Please remember it's not just time, it's also place. So it's not just when, but also where. Weather is also part of the setting. And setting, one element of setting is the atmosphere. And so setting can contribute to the atmosphere or to the mood. If it's some really creepy setting, then that also contributes to the mood that the reader feels. Regionalism is when it's set in a particular region. We're going to do some Flannery O'Connor, and you will see she's a very strong regionalist writer. She's from the South, and it's pretty obvious. Naturalism is very realistic, very modern type of writing where people are the victims of society. Again, O'Connor is a good example of that. Poe also does some of that as well. Okay, so there's some of the fiction terms to think about. And of course, the Prezi is there for you to go through in more detail. That's just some of the highlights. All right, so let's also talk about tone, style, and irony. Okay. And so this is what makes an author shine. It's what differentiates one author from another. Okay, so tone is the attitude the author is taking about the subject. It may be different than the way the characters feel. So sometimes the characters can feel excited about something, but you get the sense overall that this is actually a bad thing for them. Okay, so we see that sometimes how the character feels about what the topic and how the writer feels about the topic aren't always the same thing. Okay, and that some of that depends on how we portray the character. So in this week's reading, consider how Granny Weatherall feels about death. Her tone and the author's tone kind of feel a little different. Style is what makes a writer distinctive from all other writers. So if you've ever read Hemingway and Faulkner, you would know that they look and sound very different. Okay. So traits of style include their sentence length. Some writers use very, very short staccato sentences, whereas other writers use very long-winded sentences. So sentence length is huge. Tone, topics discussed. A Poe story anywhere, because if it's creepy and scary and a little on the odd side and somebody dies, it's probably a Poe story. So the topics that they discuss, and also the word choice. So what time period are their words from? What kind of verbs do they use? Do they use tons of adjectives? That would be Faulkner. So word choice, okay? And typically we have favorite authors because we really like their style. And once you've read one book from an author, a lot of times you could recognize any other book from that same author because their style carries over from story to story to story, okay? Just a few things about word choice, some terms I want you to know. Diction, there are two types of diction, and that's simple language versus very flowery and elevated diction. Okay, so that also influences writing style is their diction, so their word choice. Also, the use of regional words. So if you see things like y'all, that's probably Southern. That's definitely more Texas, Southwest. So that also contributes to writer's style and to word choice. Hyperbole is an exaggeration to express a point. Paradox, when something seems contradictory, but it's not. We will see that a lot in Hamlet. Hamlet loves to speak in hyperbole and paradox. So you'll see those when we get there. And then metonymy is the use of a specific name or an object to stand for something else. So we use this when we talk about like the bald eagle or the American flag or things like that. Those represent the America. Or we can talk about the White House when we're really talking about the executive branch. So we use a specific object to sort of represent a bigger idea. And the stream of consciousness is a type of writing where the writer writes the way they think. And the way we think is usually much longer, rambling sentences. And so stream of consciousness is sort of a psychological writing, which is also a particular type of word choice. Okay. So irony, there are a couple different kinds of irony. And the big idea with irony is what something appears to be and its reality are different. Okay, so there's a difference between the way things appear and the way they actually are. So verbal is when what we say is opposite of what we actually mean. Okay. So there's some examples here. A lot of times it's because we're using hyperbole, things like that, overstatement, understatement, something like that, that what we say is not actually what we mean, and you know the character doesn't mean it. Poe does this a lot, so be looking for that. Situational is when the situation is what is different than what common sense dictates. This is not what you would think. So an example I posted here was from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and it says, water, water everywhere, all the boards to drink, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. So they're completely surrounded by water, but it's the ocean, so they can't drink it, and they're dying of dehydration in the middle of a giant body of water. So that's situational irony. Dramatic irony is when the character makes a statement that he or she believes to be true, but we as the audience know it's not true. Shakespeare does this a lot. So when Romeo finds out that Juliet is drugged and he says she's dead, but we all know that she's only been drugged and she's not actually dead. Okay, so when the audience knows something that the characters don't, that's dramatic, mostly because you see it in drama, because that's fun. All right, so last one I want to talk about is cosmic irony. And so this is an ironic twist of fate. So this is when fate intervenes and what we all believe should happen is not what happens. So it's typically cosmic irony you see because of the twist ending. Okay, O. Henry is one of the most famous writers who does cosmic irony, and we're going to read some O. Henry this week. This is different than peripeteia because that's a sudden reversal of fortune, whereas irony or cosmic irony is ironic that it happened. So then there is some disparity between what should have happened, what we all thought would happen, and what does suddenly or what does happen at the end of the story. So typically peripeteia does not happen at the very end of the story. Usually we see it at the beginning or the middle. The ironic twist of fate is because fate intervenes. Usually peripeteia is caused because of a character's choice. So the character causes this to happen. So they are just a little bit different. All right, so that's a little bit about tone, style, and irony. Make sure you look through these, write down your definitions on your term sheet so that you have that to study from. But that is a basic overview of what we're going to be talking about in week 2. Make sure you read over the stories, and I will see you in the discussion board. Bye.